So on the existing governance regimes and how today things are moving in terms of the global trends, I think there's a big move towards new technologies, and I think that's something where we are all struggling within hard law as well as soft law to be ahead of the curve. And I think that's a huge gap that we are really struggling to bridge in terms of being able to have on the horizon the emerging technologies that are already potentially weaponized, but also those who are rather benign and that could have an impact on how weapons are used. And I think that's one of the dilemmas within the so-called the AI and the so-called banning killer robots campaign, is that these technologies don't necessarily exist, and how to ban them before they exist. And the ethics behind it has also been quite challenging in the negotiations around a ban of a technology that we don't have yet. So I think that's one of those trends that is on my horizon at least. Another one is looking at the existing frameworks that we have and how to actually put them into practice. Where multilateralism has been challenged, I don't think I would go as far as in crisis, because I think multilateralism is still functional, but has been challenged by various actors within existing frameworks, but also within future and existing negotiations. That's an interesting question about humanitarian actors, because when you talk about the risks that weapons have on them, it's something that goes back, decades in terms of that assessment. And I think in the 40s there was sort of the advent of how weapons have started to be governed, and how actually we have started to think about what happens on the ground to other people, civilians, but that's also where the humanitarian sort of pillar or strand also started to exist. I think for me, one of the big concerns I have in terms of humanitarian actors in conflict settings is how there seems to have been an erosion of the exceptionalism that they are in that space, and how they have increasingly become targets. And I think that in the beginnings of humanitarian action, they were very much protected by what they symbolized. And that's been less and less respected by both state and non-state actors. And I think that's the biggest threat in terms of governance of conflict at large, not necessarily weapons per se. In terms of expanding the weapons governance discussion, I think this conference in particular has, for me, been a very nurturing environment to see how different spaces have been doing or addressing governance. May it be from sort of looking into space, or looking at different data technologies and how those have evolved, and how they've tried to self-regulate or find alternatives to what's out there to be able to create solutions. And I think for me, this conference is only the start of that discussion. So I think you would need a fair few more discussions of this type to be able to start finding the pathways that might lead to solutions. So I don't think I want to sort of jump the gun, and sorry for the pun on that one, on predicting where those paths might be or who might be the key people to bring together. I think this has been sort of an interesting petri dish of ideas and people, and I've certainly learned a lot in the last, 36 hours, from the different speakers and the people that I've been in touch with now that I would have never thought of actually contacting.